Off we go. So welcome everybody to the second session of day 4. Almost done. I can't believe it. This week has flown past. And welcome to the Humans Connecting with Horses conference. And I think most of the faces I see here have been here before, but even for those that are watching this first on YouTube, welcome to the first Humans Connecting with Horses conference. I sort of shudder when I say that because I've said the first before in things, and 5-6 years later we're still doing it. So I'm happy this year. I think all the Excel sheets and the lists and the templates that I've done, I know then that, you know, they'll be good to use for another year. So the first year is the hardest, but and the presenters we've had in the audience and the participants, it's been phenomenal. And just to add to that, we have Dorothy with us today. And her session is Self-Awareness and the Quest for Authentic Sacred Space. I've seen it. It's amazing. And with that, like I say, I think we'll keep ourselves on mute and off video unless we want. So Dorothy, just let me know anytime you want people to come back on and we can have a discussion, or we could just do that at the end. I will watch the chat for you. Other than that, over to you, my friend.
Okay, thank you so much. Pardon me. It's such a pleasure for me to be here with you all today. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because, as you know, life is an exercise in self-awareness. It's too bad that we don't learn that until later. At least that's been my experience. My presentation is on self-awareness and the quest for authentic sacred space, and it's based on my own experience of life so far, because I'm still here. And what I'm going to do here is draw on some examples from my own experience to illustrate the topic. But first of all, what I want to do, in the interest of creating authentic sacred space for this, is I'm going to lay my cards on the table and tell you that I experience, or I have been experiencing, a conflict this past week while I've been preparing this presentation, because one of the issues that gets in the way of me being able to be authentic is my problem with being visible. It's always been easier in my life to be invisible. There are many reasons for that go way, way back into my early childhood. It's part of my trauma. So going through with this presentation today is very important to me. I could have called Linda and said, look, Linda, this is beyond me. It's too intimidating. But I wanted to do it because, again, it's a subject matter that I'm passionate about. And I thought if I am authentic to you all, by saying, this is what I'm dealing with right at the moment as we go into this experience together, you won't be wondering why I'm stumbling over my words or having trouble collecting my thoughts. I will be referring to notes because that's part of my security as I do this, but I'll try as much as possible to just speak directly from my heart. One of the reasons I want to share this, or I put this out there, is that I want to offer it as an example of something that gets in the way of us being authentic. When we're not aware of the things that are standing in our background, we don't understand why the authentic sacred space that we want so badly can't come to us. So this is my exercise today. Part of this is about peeling back the next layer of the onion and being able to allow myself to be more visible in an arena in which I want to feel comfortable, because I feel passionate about the work with the horses, and I feel passionate about being authentic, so that we can go out into the world and be our truest selves and make the world a better place. So having put my cards on the table there, and I wanted to pose this question at the beginning, and you might think about this as we're going through. What stands in the way of your ability to create authentic sacred space for yourself? Is there something that's sort of latent that within your own programming, I guess, that doesn't allow you to be able to attract into your lives the things that you need in order to be able to create that space? The material we cover in the next 45 minutes or so is designed to provoke thought around this question. As I mentioned, I'll illustrate by referring to my own story occasionally. As well, we will review 4 threats to authentic sacred space that have come to me while I've been going through this process. And I will review 6 steps to creating that space. It's something I call the mucking meditation, and this was born of years of mucking stalls and picking paddocks and that sort of thing, because I have found that mucking a horse's stall is a great metaphor for clearing the space to allow for new growth and new opportunity. Okay. So first technical glitch. I can't progress. Oh, there it is. Okay. So self-awareness in the quest for authentic sacred space. I've pretty much done my introduction. Come on. Okay. We're stuck. There it is. Okay. So this image I call a reflection of peace. And I think when we are at peace with ourselves, we are at peace with life. But what does it mean to be at peace with ourselves? Is it about being somewhere or with someone who brings that peace to us? It begs the question, have you ever moved somewhere believing it was the answer to all your problems, only to discover that your problems have tagged along for the ride? I know that I've experienced that in my life. How about you? Okay. I don't understand why this isn't working.
Try your mouse.
Yeah, I don't understand. Okay. I don't understand. We are having technical
That's all right.
difficulties.
You know what? If you want to move them that way, just in there, that's fine. Don't worry about it.
What
That's
if
fine.
you just click down there? Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
okay.
click on the
That's
next
fine.
one. Yeah.
All right.
Okay, there you go.
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
This is in rehearsal. This was absolutely fine.
That's okay.
So, okay. So there you are. Even my okay, I'm not even going to go there. I'm not even going to joke about it. It is what it is. Okay. So slide number 5. So basically the idea is wherever you go, there you are. So I'm going to briefly illustrate by saying that 5 years ago, my husband and I purchased a farm where I could do the field work, the facilitated equine experiential learning work. I wanted to create a practice in a beautiful place with that was quiet and that was a good spot for being able to do this. My words fail me, talking about authentic words. The problem was that even though the place was ideal, I still brought with me all the other stuff that I was carrying around, so that for the first 2 or 3 years, or until recently, as a matter of fact, the space didn't really represent what I wanted. I was sure we would not match my own, which meant we were in constant conflict with each other in this space, which meant I couldn't create what I wanted to create. And it wasn't until recently, when the horse professional left the farm, that I could finally see what it was that had been in my way. And it had nothing to do with him. It was more about what I had projected onto the picture without realizing it. Part of it was my fear at being visible. Part of it was related to issues of indignation and being taken advantage of. But having moved beyond that now, I'm in a position where we can now create the program that we wanted to create here from the very beginning. The idea is never lose sight of the vision. You just don't know how long the vision or the dream is going to take to actually come true. So where does this kind of inner conflict begin? I can't make it any smaller. Well, self-knowledge is key. It means to understand our shadow self and what lurks in the recesses of our subconscious that sabotages even our best of intentions. We must look inward to begin to process and release the unknown. If we don't look, we don't know that it's there. So this means having the courage to shine a light into the dark corners of our subconscious and poking around to see what old coping mechanisms are still alive. Of course, it can be scary in there. We don't know what we're going to find. But knowing where we stand allows us to pick a direction forward and make the choice to leave behind the emotional baggage that weighs us down. Again, another short story from my own life. 25 years ago, my journey along the personal growth and self-discovery path began. My maternal grandmother, to whom I was very close, died suddenly. And of course, when something like that happens, it's very difficult to make sense of it at the time. But one of the things I did do was I promised her, I promised to honor her memory by living my best life. And that to me meant starting to unburden myself of all the baggage I was carrying around. I was a miserable 30-something with feeling very rudderless. And because we had a mutual passion for horses, that's when my journey with the horses recommenced. I had been away from horses for 4 years, the 4 most miserable years of my life, I will add. And I promised that I would find my way through life by wrapping myself in the blanket of the horse. So I quit my corporate job. I enrolled in a coaching internship because I thought, well, if I'm going to start somewhere, I may as well start learning how to teach, how to ride a horse. And thus ensued 18 months of some of the most intense learning I've ever had. And certainly to that point, it was. I went in, I describe it as going in a marshmallow and coming out toasted. It was that intense. But it really changed my life. And every time I thought I was going to be too hard, I would just remember the promise I made to my grandmother that I would live my best life in her memory. And this was me, the day I graduated with a horse this was my first great horse teacher. I would say his name was Buck, because he was the horse that made me face my fears. He was the one that forced me to go inward and find those things that were blocking. And it was part of the first great awakening. That's how I would describe it. So of course, when we take control of our lives, we also need to find the courage to say no to the things and the people that are not serving us. Because as we know, the more we take back our lives, the less control the people around us have, and the less able they are to include us in their agenda. So if we want, we need to rediscover ourselves and live our lives with authenticity. We need to be able to let certain things in our lives go. So again, let's consider what's clouding your authenticity and needs to be cleared. Every day I ask myself a question of this sort? What's going on today for me that I need to look into that's preventing me from being my authentic self? Bruce Lipton, a respected author and scientist, said, because of how much time we spend thinking about something other than the moment we are in, science suggests we are running our default programs about 95% of our waking life. Psychologists believe that the majority of the default programs most people run are disempowering, self-sabotaging, and limiting. And I can acknowledge that this was certainly true for me for a long time, and my issues around visibility still are prone to making me, or are still prone to disempowering, self-sabotaging, and limiting me. There you go. He also notes that most of our subconscious programming takes place before the age of 7, a time when we absorb everything and have no boundaries for anything. And basically, we're living the unconscious life. So what is the unconscious life? Our life experiences accumulate, superimpose, and embed our early programming without us knowing. The behaviors we adopt, the emotional patterns that play out again and again, the habits we develop as coping mechanisms bury our truth as we struggle in survival mode. Our sacred personal space, that place of personal truth, becomes sabotaged by an overwhelming subconscious conflict that expresses itself through anger, frustration, anxiety, and on. And so, the beautiful picture of sacred space we imagine for ourselves becomes undermined by the hidden dramas and traumas of our unconscious life. That is, until we have the courage to see them for what they are and then love them away. These disruptive energies interfere with our capacity to live authentically. Instead, in our desire to make peace with the contrary environment we continuously encounter, we expend our precious energies feathering the nests of family and friends at our own expense, in the hope that making them feel better somehow helps to assuage our own inner conflicts. By doing so, however, we become more deeply mired in their dramas and drawn further away from our truth. So enter this horse. This is another part of my story. Several years after, a couple of years after the internship, I graduated from the internship, my marriage fell apart. I had to go back to corporate to earn a living so I could feed myself. Of course, life was not looking at all as I had imagined. And then my life circumstances changed, and I welcomed this beautiful horse into my life. He was my heart horse. He still is. He's no longer on this earthly plane. He departed at the end of 2017. But he was from 2006 to 2017 one of my most important teachers, because he demanded that I take a closer look at myself. He made me look inside and poke at the dark spaces that needed to be unearthed, and asked me to be authentic with them. So that meant going into therapy. That meant doing some horse work with natural horseman Chris Irwin. I trained with him for a while. That was life-altering as well. That meant taking care of my body more mindfully when I came down with adrenal fatigue, which was the result of years of living with complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which I imagine is another reason why I find it so difficult to be visible. There were a whole number of things that came up, and this horse really, I cannot express how important he was in the whole healing process for me. We went through a lot together, but mostly he made me start asking the big questions, and held space for me when I was receiving the answers and starting to learn how to process what I needed to do. We bought this farm for him. He was going to be my foundation horse for the work that I wanted to do here. And sadly, like I said, he's departed now, but I find that his spirit permeates everything. So that's why to me, he's still an important piece of the work, because he still lives on in my heart. So I thought to illustrate the journey a little bit, I would just review a chart that I pulled together. This was actually something fun that Linda suggested that I do when we were going through the first run through of my presentation. And really, it's a cursory look at my story, and demonstrates that the mountain to self-awareness needs to be climbed gradually, or the effort and processing can be overwhelming. So if we look at the brown part here, this would be, say, if you just decided you were going to do it all at once and then you crashed because it was all too overwhelming and you wanted to give up, which happens with things like diets and quitting things cold turkey without really being prepared. So really the journey to self-awareness is like climbing a mountain. And as we know, mountains have plateaus, and plateaus are where we rest, where we process, where we gear up for the next part of the journey, for the next climb. So this part here, the beginning, represents my awakening with the death of my grandmother, and the climb up the ladder of self-discovery, I suppose, or climb up the mountain to the first pass during my internship. And then after the internship, the coaching and the plateau of processing, we need to be able to hold space for our own processing. That's one of the things I've really learned. We need to allow ourselves the space to process and embody the lessons that we learn, because those are what's going to prepare us for the next shock or the next awakening. Divorce was that for me. And then there's that plateau. And then I get bare. There's the divorce, and then there was the restructuring out of a corporate job and me feeling rudderless again. And Bear coming into my life and giving me more meaning as I did the Train the Trainer course with Chris Irwin. And there's another plateau, and in that, the introduction to art therapy. And then a trip to Sarajevo. My husband was, my second husband, was traveling a lot for business, and one of the stops was Sarajevo, and I faced my trauma in Sarajevo. I don't know if any of you have been there. This was in 2009. At the time, it was still very much scarred from the conflicts of the mid-90s. So everywhere you looked, there was burned out buildings, and the people still demonstrated the trauma on their faces. There was everywhere. Everybody's putting a brave face on, but that's what we do, right? When we're traumatized, we put a brave face on so nobody really sees what's going on. And Sarajevo would not allow me to keep the brave face. Sarajevo sent me into deep therapy so that I could find out, or start to look inward to see what were the traumas that I was carrying around with me. And I knew this to be true because in Sarajevo, I had 3 major panic attacks, and it really brought me to my knees. All I could do when I came home was think, I've got to get into therapy. And into therapy I went. And that was a very long learning curve, much longer than it demonstrates here. But it was so necessary. And while the experience in Sarajevo, which is a beautiful city, the culture is very interesting, I fell in love with Sarajevo because it was the mirror of my trauma and made me wake up. So very grateful for that city and what it has meant in my life. So 10 years of therapy, adrenal fatigue, that's when the complex post-traumatic stress disorder really revealed itself to me physically. Years of hormone therapy to set all that right. A whole bunch of things had to fall into place, but I had to be willing to look at them. And even my hormone therapist asked me if I was in therapy, because he knew that if I didn't do the work, nothing he did would possibly help me, because as we know, illness starts in the mind and permeates through the body. So that was a huge learning curve and prepared me for the next level of learning, which happened for me at Horse Spirit Connections, and this is when the horses really came back into my life and said, okay, now that we've done all this, let's do this. And that was a whole other level of learning, which required processing and embodying, and which has brought me to this point in my life now where I can comfortably talk about my experiences in the hope of being able to help others who are experiencing similar challenges. This is really about me learning how to express my heart in a safe place. I thank you all for being here to help me to do that. Because if there's one thing I know, I can't help anybody as long as I'm invisible. It's impossible. So this is the next step of the learning for me. And at the end here, I put CV, which actually means coronavirus, because there's a whole other shift now. There's a whole other level of learning that needs to take place, but I feel like everything I've done to this point has prepared me for this. I don't know where it's going, like all of us. I have no idea where it's leading, but I'm going to have faith that everything that I've learned to this point is going to help me go to the next level, whatever that looks like. So basically, what I want to come back to here is that as we learn, and the more we practice what we learn, the easier the climb becomes, especially when we begin to ask these key questions. Actually, before we go ahead into that, I wanted to encourage each of you to maybe examine your own key moments in life and perhaps draw your own graph to see what lessons have come up, what were the key moments in your life that caused you to go into another learning curve. And just track your life on a chart like this, because it's actually quite, this exercise was actually quite interesting to do, because it made me appreciate all the more everything that I've learned that has brought me to where I am today. I think often we look at things and we go, oh, well, that happened and it was miserable, and maybe at the time it was, and always when we're in the middle of something is not the time to analyze it, but to go back and to be able to say, wow, I did that and I made the most of that. I didn't know what I was doing, but I kept myself together and I made the most of it, and look at where it's brought me and prepared me for now. And that's how I tend to look at things. I think the promise that I made to my grandmother was part of that. Just being able to take a different tack and just go, you know what, this is happening. The only way past it is through it. I've made a commitment to myself and to somebody I love that I will live my best life, so I'm going to make the most of this situation. Not always easy. I'm not going to say that it is, but it's worth the effort. So some questions we might ask ourselves as we're tracking along here. Are there people in your life who make me feel like nothing is ever enough? Am I walking on eggshells around someone in an effort not to ruffle feathers? And if so, what internal dramas do these woeful dynamics reflect that back to me? Because I'll suggest, because again, my own experience, if I'm tiptoeing around, if there are people in my life where nothing I ever do is enough, then that reflects that there's some part of me that's never satisfied. And I know as a perfectionist for a number of years, I'm not so much anymore, but as a perfectionist for a number of years, nothing was ever good enough for me. Didn't matter what it was. And that's a pretty horrible way to live, because it means that you're always living in anticipation of something never being good enough. And then you surround yourself with people for whom nothing is ever good enough. And then you get lost spending your time trying to figure out how to make them happy so that you're going to make yourself happy, which goes back to an earlier slide. And it's a no-win situation that way. And as far as walking on eggshells is concerned, if we're walking on eggshells around other people, what is it within ourselves that we're tiptoeing around? What part of our pain body, as Eckhart Tolle puts it, are we not willing to take a look at? Are we sort of tiptoeing around it so that we don't get hurt? And believe me, years of therapy have taught me that the only way you can love the pain away is actually find a way to locate it and embrace it and let it go. So while we're considering those questions, I want to introduce the idea of 3 types of sacred space. First of all, there's the personal, what I call the personal. It's the space within, it's our own sacred space. And we might ask ourselves about that space. Am I feeling peaceful or conflicted? Am I calm or anxious? Am I resentful or accepting? And if I am any of those things, what is precipitating that? Why would I feel peaceful or why would I feel conflicted? I think we start to ask the questions. The next sacred space is that of the intimate, the close connection between friends, family, partners, and practitioner and client. We may ask ourselves, how do our internal conflicts play out in relationship? What gets triggered and how? So I know that my reactions to some people, if I get indignant about something that's happened, I'll know that there's actually a place within that's still hurting, that's still ouchy about, still angry about something. So then it's up to me to come inside and go, okay, so what is this really about? And then the third type of sacred space is that of the environmental, the big picture. How do these conflicts project into everyday life? So are we constantly going into finding ourselves in toxic situations or surrounded by toxic people, or spending time in places that we're not really comfortable in, and in scenarios where our values conflict? With this understanding, then, how can I establish the authentic sacred space of my heart's desire? I would like to suggest we need to wake up. I really wish this was working, but anyway, we need to wake up. And I believe that any of the wake-up calls that any of us experience in life is our opportunity to take the opportunity to take another look at our lives, to decide if the course that we're on is actually the right course for us, or if it's something that we're following because of some pre-programming that we're not totally aware of. They're where our subconscious is just saying, well, this is the route you take, but you don't really know why you're taking it. So part of the waking up, when I look back on my life, I recognize those key moments that I put in my chart there. It's the death of my grandmother, my divorce, the restructuring from my job, owning a horse for the first time, Sarajevo again, the moments, the learning that I had from the times when I really suffered from the adrenal issues, the lessons that Feel and the horses have taught me about boundaries and alignment, and understanding that the only way to be the way to be authentic is to look inside and to deal with the things that are holding you back. And of course, the farm and the learning curve that has been, and the way that that's made me look at things a lot differently as well. And then my most recent dramatic experience would be, and it was in the best way possible, was a trip to New York. And at the end of 2018, it was my first time in the city. I had won an award for some photography, a photo journal that I put together for the Equus Film Festival. And it felt like, New York felt like I was stepping out through a portal. It was like Sarajevo was the portal into exploring my trauma and healing, and New York was the perfect metaphor because it had experienced its own trauma, and as we know, in 2001, but it was a recovering city. And it was like New York reflected that part of me that had healed. And it was like stepping through a portal. And I can remember it being in the taxi going from Manhattan to Brooklyn, just feeling the elation of having come out the other end of 10 years of intense work. Didn't mean the work was done, but it did mean that there was a new chapter was opening up. And from that moment on, I had promised, that was in December 2018. And of course, 2019, January, New Year's resolutions and that sort of thing. Instead of setting a resolution, I set an intention, and that was to thrive, which means that every decision in my life now, going forward, is based on whether or not the choice I make is going to allow me to thrive. My life up until that point had been a lot about survival, and being in those you're coping with those mechanisms that had been put in place so long ago. The invisibility part issue being a part of that. So now that I'm able to look at the fact that I want to be visible so that I can thrive, it helps to put that piece, that old piece, the part that wants to hide, in a different light, and I can heal that and let it go. Now, I'm not suggesting for one moment that I'm going to let it go and it's never going to come back, but there's more consciousness around it. There's a more awareness, so that the next time it comes up, I can go, oh, hi, it's you again. You know what? We don't need to do this dance anymore. Let's try something new. So my lovely bear asks, what's your drama? We all have something. I'm well aware that there are still things that lurking that need to be addressed. So I would just ask you perhaps to think for a moment, what are the things that are lurking in the background that prevent you from being you're completely authentic, so that you can have the sacred space that your heart desires. So let's consider some more questions. Oh man, okay. I don't understand why this is happening, but anyway, what negative childhood experiences or dramas have been swept under the carpet and are tripping up your intention for authentic sacred space? I can think back to a few of my own childhood experiences, which I won't delve into, but you know, a lot of them are around emotional abandonment, physical and mental and emotional abuse. Others might look at poverty. Others might have, you know, some kind of tragedy that happened in their childhood. There are all kinds of things. And when we're children, of course, we just learn to cope. We don't understand necessarily what we're doing or why we're doing it, but we find ways to cope because we need to live. And if we don't have the appropriate support systems around us, that means that we end up raising ourselves, which was a lot of my issue. And then we learn only to trust ourselves, even though we may not know exactly what we're doing. So anyway, and so these are the types of things that one might consider as being something that's in the way of being authentic. Another one is, what family dramas do you cling to without realizing it, out of a sense of loyalty, even though this creates conflict for you? So family dramas, I'm sure we all have them, but they might include toxic relationships or addictions or mental health issues, things that because they're a part of our family, we are exposed to on a continuous basis. We find ways to cope, but it doesn't necessarily reflect who we are. So one of the things we need to do is to be able to make peace with those and find our own truth on the other side of them. And then the other one, what possible ancestral prejudices, traditions, or dysfunctions insinuate themselves into your daily life and hijack your intention for authentic sacred space? I can think of a few in my own family. We had, my grandfathers were both misogynistic. And so the effect on my grandmothers and my mother was very detrimental. They had a fear of authority, and they were extremely strong women, very strong women. And so, you know, I choose, instead of focusing on the trauma of what they experienced, which is something that by osmosis would have affected me, even though my mother tried very hard to not make it so. I think parents do that. They want the best for their children, so they try to shelter them from the family traumas. I choose to focus on the fact that they were extremely strong women. And that is the example that I want to follow going forward, so that my own intention for living authentically is not impeded. And then we need to ask the question, well, if we're aware of all these things, what is it within us that allows them to keep affecting our lives in a way that prevents us from being authentic? Okay. We cannot free ourselves of negative beliefs and the people and environments they foster until we acknowledge these beliefs exist within us in some form. To do this, we must learn to be fearless. Another quote from Bruce Lipton: fear causes 90% of the, and it's difficult for me to see, fear causes 90% of the illness on the planet, and it's all generated by the perceptions of the mind. The picture you hold in your mind creates the behavior and biology you express in life. So if I were to refer to my own example, having lived with complex post-traumatic stress disorder for most of my life, I can look back and I can see that the stress on my nervous system and the other functions of my physiology was a direct result of the stress going on in my mind, the need to be perfect, all of the the idea that nothing was ever enough, all the people I had to please, and on and on. And over years of working on that in a therapeutic situation, my body, the adrenal issues were able to resolve themselves as I was able to resolve what was going on in my mind. So let's take a look at some threats. These are the 4 threats that I mentioned earlier to sacred space. Fear, of course. Oh, and my internet connection is unstable. Are you still there, Linda? Okay, I'm going to.
You're all good. Yep.
Okay, I'm going to trust that you are.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, so threats to sacred space. Well, fear is the obvious one. It's the anxiety related to perceived threats to the ego, because the ego never wants to let go of what it knows and how it knows to control. We conquer our fears and create authentic sacred space by boldly going where we have never gone before and facing our cling-ons and surrendering to the process of letting them go. So you can maybe come up with a few of those for yourself. I know what my cling-ons are, and one of them is the fear of being visible. The lack of intention or commitment. Intention is the target, commitment is doing whatever it takes to get there, and these are the first steps to managing fear. Since I set the intention of thriving, I've certainly been presented with challenges, but because I'm committed to thriving, I have made also the commitment not to suffer. Suffering is crippling. As long as we're suffering, we cannot be thriving. So with my intention to thrive, it puts the suffering into perspective, and I can make the decision, well, I could respond this way, which is the old way, to be indignant, to be unhappy, to be miserable, to scream everything's unfair, or I can learn to be accepting and find the lesson to be learned and understand that whatever's happening now is for my benefit in the long run. And then to be committed to that intention is also part of that journey. And I think, again, to the commitment or my intention to live my best life in honor of my grandmother's memory, and my commitment to that, which has stood me in good stead for more than 20 years. The next one, lack of self-awareness. Self-awareness is key to creating sacred space. Recognizing how we treat ourselves and others, as well as the environment in which we live, work, and play, is the mirror reflecting our way of being back to us. This is when the healing process can begin. And then doubt and weakness. Purging personal dramas takes willingness, strength, courage, persistence, commitment, and a heartfelt intention to follow the path to inner peace. With a firm commitment to our desire to be authentic and with help from appropriate objective third parties when warranted, we can establish and nurture our sacred space. And I perhaps can't emphasize the last point enough. We all like to think that we can take care of ourselves, that we can get it all done on our own. But the fact of the matter is that really it's so important to have an objective third party that we can bounce our thoughts and our feelings off of without judgment. And I will suggest that horses are among the most effective teachers that way, because they're totally non-judgmental. And when we as facilitators work with the horses and work with a client to help them find their authenticity, it's not the facilitator that delivers the message, it's the horse that touches the heart of the participant for them to find the message on their own. And the practitioner, the facilitator, becomes the one that the participant can bounce their thoughts off of in a non-judgmental way. So yes, horses as teachers can certainly help that as well. Oh, gotta take a breath. And let's do that with a moment of this message brought to you by 3 horses. The struggle for my space. So Euclid on the right is interfering with Wicket, who's on his hind legs, and saying, no, this is my space. And Fred in the background is saying, I don't care, just get her done. I'm happy where I am. And that's really how we need to, a really good way of looking at it. You know, do you want to interfere in negative energy, or do you just want to be able to no, that's not the right way of putting it. The right way of putting it. Sometimes it's better to just stand off in the background while alternating negative energies take a shot at each other. I guess that's how I would put it. Anyway, I just thought that was kind of fun. You don't have to be embroiled in every argument. Okay, so moving on. This is my 6 steps for manifesting sacred space, or as I like to call it, the mucking meditation. As I was mentioning before, this was developed over many years of mucking stalls and understanding that, well, we'll get to it. Let's not get ahead of myself here. Okay, so the first step, I would say, is to recognize when you see something that doesn't belong. It's important to be able to notice when something feels off in our inner worlds. Only then can we begin to see the emotion as the residue of a personal trauma or drama still subconsciously playing out. For example, during a mucking meditation, when I'm cleaning out my horse Sophie's stall, I'll assign an issue or a negative belief to the manure as something it's time to release. So being able to seek out and remove the things that are impeding our progress is very important. Of course, nobody likes a messy stall, least of all the people who own a horse. Next, separation. Once we've recognized and acknowledged the negative emotion for what it is, for example, fear, self-doubt, frustration, or anger, it needs to be separated from its unwitting host and mindfully examined. So we don't host our negative feelings on purpose. They're there because something has not yet been resolved. So again, in horse parlance, I would dig out the manure and start sifting or shaking off any bedding that can be saved until only the waste remains. Because there's no point, as they say, in throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Once I've sorted out the waste, then I can engage in some meaningful introspection. Processing requires some honest introspection. So processing our issues, our emotions, requires some honest introspection. We need to be with what we've discovered and ask some tough questions. For example, where does this originate? Is there a relationship that needs to be dissolved? Is a lack of forgiveness of self or others involved? Is there a debilitating pattern of behavior that needs to be changed? Or is perhaps some ancestral trauma continuing to play itself out below the radar? Sometimes the source of our dis-ease is deeper, thicker, and heavier than we first think, requiring significant energy to process and appropriate assistance, again, objective third party, to process and heal. So the manure becomes the metaphor for whatever is blocking our truth. Once we have processed it, we can release. With the root of the negative emotion recognized, examined, and processed, we need to commit to releasing it. Old habits and behaviors die hard, but with self-awareness, commitment, and mindfulness, we can, over time, learn to intervene and challenge our knee-jerk reactions when we feel triggered. This takes practice and patience. The more aware we become, the more readily we can engage in the process, and the faster we can set the toxic energy free. In so doing, our sacred space becomes founded on the integrity of our innermost truth. So that means dumping the waste into the manure pile for some composting. What we recognize, separate, examine, and release over time breaks down into the fertile compost of wisdom and experience that is the foundation of our authentic sacred space. It also helps us to notice when the space is being invaded by negative energies, so we can take appropriate measures to arrest them sooner rather than later. Composting is the abstract unknown morphing over time into the nuggets of wisdom that light the path to the next moment of awakening. So in going back to the horses, regular daily attention to my horse's stall makes the cleaning of it easier than if it's left for days at a time. And so it is with the attention we give to our negative emotions. When we clear the space, we make room for replenishing. A vacuum needs to be filled. That's why replenishing the space with life-affirming beliefs, habits, experiences, and knowledge is vital. Uplifting books, meditation, new open-hearted friends, inspiring talks or music, etc. help to support the fertile, nurturing foundation upon which authentic sacred space is built and in which we can thrive. Nurturing our sanctuary provides a lower threshold of tolerance for drama and enables us to excise toxic energy before it can take root there. So in the mucking meditation, when I am done cleaning my horse's stall, I fill it with fresh straw and hay. And then I wait for the next day to repeat the process all over again. Which illustrates to me that the process of releasing, the process of processing and releasing those things that stand in the way of our authentic space it's a continual process, and it happens in layers, just as the chart demonstrated earlier. Because on each level, we go to on each level of growth, we go to a deeper level of understanding of the things that are still in our way. So the point is, just because we release an old issue or toxic emotion once doesn't mean we don't need to do it again. Next time, it will simply show up differently, asking us to be consistent in our intention to clear the old, to make way for the new. And not to put too fine a point on it, a horse's stall, or paddock for that matter, is never dirty the same way twice and must be consistently attended to in order to maintain a space where the horse can thrive. So at the beginning of this presentation, I revealed an issue that comes up for me from time to time, that of allowing myself to be visible. And really that's about allowing my heart and the many of expressions of it to be visible to the world and being comfortable with that. I took up the challenge of presenting to ease off this new layer of that brittle old onion. Between my life with horses, music, writing, and photography, I've had many opportunities to be in the spotlight. During these times, I have been cushioned by or sometimes overwhelmed by the light of others. This exercise, as daunting as it felt a few days ago when I realized I was confronting this issue yet again, has been one of learning to stand on my own 2 feet while sharing something of my heart. And so, let this be my challenge to you. Take some time, perhaps, to create your own awakening to self-awareness chart and celebrate your journey so far. Look at the key moments in your life, the lessons that they taught you, and how well you came through it. And how these lessons are going to take you forward into the next chapter of your life. If things are still coming up, ask the hard questions and take them to the horses. Find a stall or a paddock to muck and do it methodically and with an attitude of meditation. And whether you do that with yourself, for yourself, or with a client, it will amaze you at what the simple task of cleaning space does to help clear the mind. Last week, as I was preparing this presentation, Sophie was in the stall with me as I was cleaning it out, and she was an active participant. She often stood in my way as an obstacle that needed to be removed. She inspected the wheelbarrow with its new contents. What can I learn from what's been discarded? She pawed at a pile of clean straw I'd put in the corner. Why look for problems where they don't exist? And finally, she rolled happily in the replenished bedding, her sacred space, a reflection of freedom of movement in the new space. It was a profound moment of confirmation that I'm on the right track. So I'd like to end with this quote. These are our times and our responsibilities. Every human being has a sacred duty to protect the welfare of our Mother Earth, from whom all life comes. In order to do this, we must recognize the enemy, the one within us. We must begin with ourselves. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Dorothy. I would like to see if there's any questions, or if we want to maybe just come off mute and come back onto video, and maybe we can just all have a conversation. Dorothy, it was amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I'm not on video yet.
I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry that the PowerPoint didn't work. I don't understand what happened there.
That's okay. Not a worry. And maybe if you want to go off share screen, Dorothy, and then we can all be on the larger
stop
screen.
share. Okay, yeah, there we go. Yay.
All right. So I would like to invite any questions that people have, any comments. Open the floor to you guys.
Click on that and then you'll get everybody on.
Okay. Now I can see everybody's beautiful faces. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Can I just say, that was just absolutely amazing. I mean, I am absolutely wowed by your courage and your immense gift to us tonight.
Thank you so much.
I shall treasure it completely. So really and truly, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to say the same. There's a thing about vulnerability. I remember the lovely Brené Brown and talking about vulnerability and being seen, and how we've all kept ourselves small. And so I could feel, and just, yeah, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. I won't ever forget this. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. Honestly, I appreciate that. I appreciate your words.
Anybody else? Dorothy, I see a
Yeah,
worksheet. I see a worksheet coming. All those things I was envisioning. How does this look like in a worksheet that we could work through when we're doing our? Anyhow, that was just.
Well, I can certainly develop something. And I honestly, I really believe that doing one of those charts, like I really think that was a little bit of inspiration when you and I discussed that, Linda. And I think doing a chart of our lives, just to see, honor our experiences and see how far we've come by them and through them, is an important exercise, because I don't believe that we give ourselves enough credit for the journey that we take, and how much we actually have to look inwards in order to make the journey outside, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
Yeah, but I would encourage everybody to do that.
Sure. Margaret?
I really appreciated the metaphor, the mucking meditation, and I really appreciated that. It's that part felt so authentic to me.
Oh, good. Well, it's a very powerful exercise, I have to say, because there's nothing more satisfying than picking up a fork full of quote unquote shit and saying, okay, I'm done with this argument with this person. I'm going to throw it out. I don't want anything else to do with it, because then later on, when this person comes up and they want to create an issue for you again, you think of that fork of manure that you threw out and you go, no, I promised myself that I'm not going there again. Right? It helps to reinforce the commitments that you make to yourself, not to go to places where you've been that cause you distress. That's for me that's what helps for me. It's like, I don't need to go there again. I've done it. I want to replenish my space with something far more positive that builds me up, that allows me to thrive. Because every time I'm in an argument with this particular person, I suffer. I go back into survival mode. I pick up all the old habits that I used to have, and then I don't thrive anymore. So for me, being able to envision discarding the things that don't serve me anymore with a pitchfork of poop it's a reminder to me that I've committed to thrive. I don't need to go there anymore. Let's put some nice fresh straw in there and roll around in it a little bit. Enjoy that part of life more than, because we don't have to entertain anybody else's drama.
Yeah.
Especially when. Yes.
I love how you added the step, though, the composting step, that there is wisdom in all of that too, and you haven't just thrown it out. And
absolutely,
that's brilliant.
It's like I said, that the once we have discarded those things from our lives, or at least released them, they go away and they compost. They become something else that we can come back to later. And this is when we can talk about the things that happen to our lives and they don't make us cry, because we found our power in those experiences instead of our pain. The pain has been allowed to break down and become the fertilizer for our power going forward, not just for the rebuilding of our own lives, but for the lives of those that we touch around us. We become empowered to help other people find their power.
Dorothy, I think with your vulnerability and your sharing, what you've been doing is normalizing the process. Because I think so many people, especially women, tend to think it's just me. I'm the only one that's failing. I'm the only one that's not making it the way I should.
Mm-hmm.
And this was such a gift. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Because my pleasure. Yeah, we're none of this we're none of us in this alone. We all have our own journeys, but we need to understand that our journeys connect and that we need to find ways to do the journey in a way that supports one another. You know, and I find, you know, doing, I mean, I love Linda for what she's doing here, because this is bringing a community of like-minded and like-hearted people together to follow their own journeys together, right? From each other, we learn to grow and to be our best selves, so that we can go out and help other people again.
You know, one thing I wanted to add about being seen, which is one of my issues also, is I had to remember the audience wants me to succeed.
Mm,
The audience is breathing with me,
right. Yeah.
you know, and we're so glad you've succeeded. Thank you.
Oh. I'm glad I've succeeded too. Thank you so much. So thank you so much.
And I think Dorothy and I were talking about that, especially the graph. When it came up, there was a permission there. There was a permission I felt when we looked at it before. I felt a permission that I didn't have to take that up in that crash. I could go at this, and it was okay that my life had gone like this, because I looked at that as a negative. And it was that I just felt, and that was just me personally, but I felt that there was a permission granted at that moment to go, oh, that's how it's supposed to go. It's okay to go that way. You don't have to, you know, run up the mountain. So it was
because you run up the mountain, there are so many other things that come up with that. There's so much stress attached to it, right? And expansion of energy, expensive energy. It's just, I just remember from, you know, all of the therapy that I've done, you know, it's building blocks. It's taking baby steps. And if after one baby step, you take another, and you learn from the last step, and you keep moving, but not in a way that's overwhelming, because you can't possibly absorb all the information at once. It's like we can't release, we can't go inside and see the deepest, darkest secrets until we've had a chance to accustom ourselves to the fact that there might be deep, dark secrets in there, right? And they're overshadowed by other things that need to come first. The simpler things. It's like you don't teach a person to jump a horse over a 3-foot fence until they know how to canter in both directions at balanced, first. You know, I'm not sure that's the right metaphor, but what I'm saying is you can't teach somebody to fly until they can walk. You know, it's like you don't teach a horse. It's somebody else can maybe offer a better metaphor. I'm open. You know, but you can't run before you can walk, and the running part of healing comes after you've been able to walk through it a little bit. You know, like the adrenal fatigue that I had for 5 years was so debilitating. That was the only thing that I could process at that time. And all of my therapy work, everything was around resolving the issues behind what had precipitated the adrenal fatigue. Yeah. And it took a long time, but it needed to be done. And now I can stand up and talk about it and say, you know, I can share the nuggets of wisdom from that, because it's not a painful part of my story anymore. It's simply a part of my story that has empowered me to be able to take the next step.
Excellent. Well, if there's no more questions, I think we will wrap that up. Dorothy, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. You did great. You did great.
From the bottom of my heart, thank you. And thank you everybody for stopping by to listen. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And this will all be up on YouTube later on. Dorothy, I'll add your website if people want to contact you there. and
sure.
talk more and continue the conversation. I think you've all been on ones before, but go over to our Humanity Needs the Horses. We're going to definitely continue the conversation there. Just keep on getting to know each other and talk more and tell these stories more, because we all have so much richness to offer.
We certainly do. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much, Linda. Thank you, everyone. It's
Thank
been
you,
a pleasure.
guys.
Thank you very
All right,
much.
we'll see you tomorrow, hopefully. Bye.
Bye. Have a great
Bye.
day.
And we're going to stop recording.